We would now like to welcome our final speaker of the day, architect Leena Naqvi. Originally from Pakistan, Leena graduated with a bachelor's in architecture from Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture, Karachi, and eventually a master's degree in sustainable architectural design from Sweden. She has worked with design and architecture in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Austria, and now lives and works in Sweden. She employs bricolage as a concept for practicing responsible, sustainable design solutions. She is the creator of the EAT project, a project that strives to understand and work with cultural identity, migration, and oral history through food and design in today's excessively global age, and runs EAT Umeå, which is a practice-based research project in the city of Umeå in northern Sweden. Leena serves on the board of Svensk Form Västerbotten, which is a knowledge platform intermediary and advocate for the design field in Sweden. I would now like to call architect Leena Naqvi on the stage.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I follow Ijaz Sahab, who was my advisor, external advisor for my thesis. He doesn't remember. I don't want to remind him. And fortunately for all of you, I've moved on from architecture a little bit. So today, I'm going to be talking of food. I'm talking of ingredients and the significance of taste. But most importantly, I'm going to be talking of how the migrant food culture is the key to a socially and environmentally sustainable society. It is astonishing to see how underrepresented food and flavors continue to be, how they have been quietly transgressing borders, races, and beliefs, and how incredibly diverse they are across cultures. It is really important, therefore, to understand that migration, food history, regional diets, and historical trade patterns must be investigated further. Food impacts the everyday life of everyone. It is about sustenance and pleasure. It is about showing and receiving love. Food is often the first thing for an immigrant community to start to integrate its culture into a new land. For it is a language everybody speaks and understands. Every sixth person in the current Swedish society was born outside of the country. What happens after the immigration causes one of the largest debates in the countries, for it's one of the most talked about issues. The debates sort of indicate how complicated and complex this issue is. For the debates extend from talking about how Sweden is doing really well with terms for integration, and how it still has lots to do with regards to it. Today, we live in a multicultural society more than ever before. The foods we eat, the clothes we wear, are all part of global networks. So, this is a supermarket. In the 2015 migrant crisis, a German supermarket pulled off all of the foreign goods from its shelves. And it goes to show how the debate on whether or not migrants are welcome is so relevant right now. Integration is often assumed to be a one-way process. It's not. The immigrants are expected to dress the same, talk the same, and they're expected to celebrate the same holidays. But there isn't much insight into what the knowledge that the immigrants are coming with, the experiences of the immigrants, and the memories. They're not celebrated. Integration, one needs to remember, is a two-way street. Sweden also has a national integration program in place. It's called Swedish for Immigrants. It's a free school where people go to learn Swedish, and it includes studies on Swedish culture and Swedish society. The students are expected to and encouraged to attend it. It's not compulsory for anybody to attend it. But what's really interesting about the SFE Institute is that it becomes a melting pot of different cultures. Whereas Sweden the government decided that this is going to be the place where they're going to impart Swedish education and more information about Sweden, people from other cultures end up meeting here, and it becomes this wonderful place for everybody to meet from different cultures. Today, I'm here to talk about a food-based public research project, which is running in the northern city of Umeå in Sweden. It is an evolving three-year investigation, and we have been trying to attempt to understand the concepts of home, roots, and food memories for the diaspora settled in the city. Now, fika is a social institution in Sweden. Fika is effectively just a coffee break accompanied by some pastries. Just for perspective, when we are working, we get 2 fika breaks a day. It's apart from lunch. So fika really holds that significance in the day. But at SFE, what was really interesting was, which is where the project was designed, or conceived rather, was that when you're sitting at the table for lunch, over fika, people would open their lunch boxes, and over food from different countries, aromas would mix. And therefore, everybody would sit together and start talking about their cultures and about where the food came from. Sweden as a country holds very liberal views over migration and has opened its border to migration in the 2015 migrant crisis. In fact, out of a population of 9.8 million, which I know is funny considering we are in Karachi right now and the population is over 20 million, almost 25% of the inhabitants are foreign-born. The project that I'm speaking of is based in the city of Umeå, which is, like I said, is further north. Umeå is situated closer to the Arctic Circle than it is to Stockholm, in fact. It's a university town. With establishment of the university in the 1960s, it grew rapidly. Rapidly for Sweden, I should say, because it only has 120,000 population at the moment. Most of the people are related to the university working there, but it's also important to mention that it's a transient town, because students come and go, and but what makes it really interesting, though, because of the transient status of the city, is that it makes it a multicultural society. Now, the notion of the foreigner bringing in the new ideas is not a new one. But in fact, a large part of human history, the immigrant, the explorers brought in new ideas, new foods, new spices, and so on. Global movement introduced new futures also. What was interesting is that Sweden, for instance, only got garlic in the 1970s. They had no access to garlic before that. In the Indian subcontinent, potatoes only started being harvested in the late 18th century. So imagine the horrors of a biryani without the aloo. And now that I have your attention on biryani, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the project. The research methodology of the project follows that there are 3 parts. The first part is that we interview women that are in the city. Actually, before I speak that, I should mention that the project specifically interviews and covers women, investigates the women migrants that have chosen to live in Umeå. For we believe that the women carry the generational burden of maintaining cultural heritage by cooking the traditional recipes and keeping them alive. More so because research statistics say that women are more likely to follow their partners, and since Umeå is a university town, a lot of the men that the women follow are working or studying as researchers. The research methodology, the first part, we interview the women from different cultures. In the second part, we follow them, we photograph them, creating a food from their country. In the third part, we organize a workshop that these women lead, a food workshop. So effectively, the food workshop is always held in the city center, in this cultural center, and open to public, which anybody can attend. The project, therefore, brings to fore immigrant women, each with a story to tell and a recipe to share. During the course of these interviews and food workshops these women have held, besides learning about various use of ingredients, processes, and spices, participants have discovered vegan recipes from India, China, Turkey, and Africa, from particular regions in those countries that were historically bereft of dairy. This highlights the fact that in spite of globalization, people are generally unaware of how food has impacted the society. But why is this conversation important today? This conversation is important because once the project started going on, we started becoming one with the stories that these women were telling us through their food. It became a shared experience. as one of the essential design elements of this project was no recipes were going out during these food workshops. The people, the participants, had to feel the batter. They had to taste what they were making. They had to, get a sense of the aromas. They had no measurements to go by. They had to really understand the flavors. The first ever workshop, I will now start discussing some case studies. The first ever workshop was held by a woman called Sukya Yu, who was from Korea. And she was teaching us how to make kimchi. Now, why is kimchi important? Kimchi is not important, but what we learn from kimchi, for instance, kimchi is a fermented, salted cabbage. The first part is the salting. And she spoke no Swedish or no English, so effectively nobody had a common language with her. Participants were eager to know at one point, one was to know that the cabbage is salted, what do we do? So she said, okay, and I'm going to demonstrate this now. She said, pretend you're the cabbage. So now I'm a cabbage. And she went like this. And then she goes, I'm going to take this here. She goes, when the cabbage is salted and you're a cabbage, you hug yourself. That's when the leaves wilt. That's when you know that the cabbage is ready. And that's what was really interesting about the project. That's when we realized that food really is a tool and a social instrument from the migrants. It's really a common language. She could just talk about food, using food, and explain things without actually talking. One of the other important things is that these women that led the workshops were not professional chefs, none of them. They were all impassionate home cooks who were using food in different capacities to integrate into society. For most of these women, and I would say migrants in general, food becomes an icon of cultural identity. For instance, Patricia, she made something called an arepa, which is called reina pepiada. It is an iconic food for Venezuela. Although the arepa is found throughout the South Americas, you ask, why is that, the particular reina pepiada, so iconic? That's because the Venezuelans decided that they're going to combine their favorite pastime with their favorite food. And the Venezuelans' favorite pastime is beautiful women and beauty pageants. In 1955, Venezuela won their first Miss World beauty pageant. And so what they did was, they developed a stuffing for the reina pepiada, which was effectively, reina means reigning, and pepiada means voluptuous. So they combine, because you understand that the reina pepiada then becomes a lesson into cultural history, as it goes to show how history, national pride, and custom can all be stuffed into one voluptuous arepa, just like the Venezuelans did. But to move things more seriously, like I said earlier, the immigrants have been using food in different ways. One of the most important ways, or most significant ways, is how cooking is a means of survival. A lot of women that we interviewed were working with food to establish themselves, to make money. Wei Zhang, who came from China, who was actually an illegal immigrant in the beginning, she spoke no Swedish and no English. It was so rudimentary, she could basically just say yes or no. She was making dumplings already when we met her. She was selling them in a food cart in the city center, and she was also providing them to a restaurant. So she was already getting some income from out of that. She was a very demure, reserved woman who did not talk much, but that's partly also because her husband, who also spoke Chinese, was communicating with her and helping translate for her. But during the workshop, when the participants were again inquiring, they were, mixing the filling for the dumplings, we heard somebody scream, "Stop!" across the room, and everybody turned to look around because we didn't really realize what was going on. How could this woman have this, this volume really? She was convinced, she was stopping the participant because the person was stirring it clockwise. And she said, "You're going to ruin the taste. You're going to absolutely ruin the taste. Stop, stop, stop. Don't." And again, that was really interesting because it gives you a glimpse on how cultural quirks and the cultural associations that come with food, how important they really are. These two young women, they were both the same age. They came to the city at the same time. I'm just brushing through some of the case studies we've gone through. They were both running small food programs of their own also. Colette had opened up a Facebook page inviting people for dinners, Cameroonian dinners, for anybody who wanted to experience the Cameroonian food culture. And Bindu was selling dosa batter to other Indian immigrants. It's not important that she chose to make dosa. What's important is that dosa is a staple. I'm just going to brush through this. 1 cup of rice and 1 cup of dal can effectively make a meal for an entire family. Similarly, what Colette was making was she made a soup, which is made from agusi seeds, which are natural melon seeds, which are found in the region that she's from Cameroon. They're really rich and fatty, so when you grind them and make a soup, they make a really creamy soup without actually having the added cream in there. But then, historically, these 2 women came from a region that were bereft of dairy. They never had dairy, so they developed recipes that were still healthy and creamy without those ingredients. Europeans right now, for instance, in Sweden, 1 in every Swede is a vegan or a vegetarian. The number is higher now, but there is no, I did not find a more official statistic for that. But Europeans right now are talking a lot about carbon emissions. They're talking about beef consumptions, and they're changing their food patterns, which is really amazing. But there's a heavy reliance on heavy imported products for that. Vegetarians and vegans are talking about reducing meat and cheese, but at the same time, they're consuming a lot of vegan cheese. They're eating vegan steaks. They're eating, they're consuming a lot of chemicals and substances which are not really natural. A lot of these products that I'm talking about are made from soy. And soy is a cash crop, which is effectively right now leading to greenhouse emissions and deforestation in the world. Why all of these case studies were important earlier was right now, we need to open ourselves to discussions on learning from other cultures, particularly their food, like the Cameroonian or the Indian, for insight into methods, and we need to accept that migrant knowledge can lead to very efficient food. The way the ingredients are handled varies from culture to culture and actually even house to house. So during one of the workshops that we did with an Iranian workshop, Marzia, she conducted a workshop, and this entire conversation, the whole workshop became about how these strands of saffron should be dissolved. People from different countries were talking about how they had learned and how they were convinced that this was the right method and they didn't really want to accept. But again, you kind of like really further reinforce the point that food is a common language, it's a tool. And in the same workshop, there was a conversation that ensued, that intense discussion on ingredient swapping. Marzia had brought along a curry, which had some tartness to it, and everybody was trying to guess what the base of the tartness was. So the Asians were convinced that it was tamarind, and the Europeans were talking about maybe it was the berry, maybe it was vinegar, but really it was pomegranate molasses. But again, I ask, why is that information relevant to us right now? That's really not important. It is important because a lot of the conversation on food in today focuses on food production, on agriculture, and ignores the other end of the spectrum, which is skills, flavor, and the techniques. In our current world today, we really need to begin to focus on these to understand how food will be the key to how we view migrants and how we can change cities. Because food carries an important symbolism in shared rituals and in retaining the cultural memory of our roots. It's a portable form of carrying our memories, and it harbors nostalgia. It helps humans move from place to place without really losing themselves. Taste lingers in memory, it denies prison, and it thrives outside the confines of a recipe. So while science and tradition suggest that it is impossible to replicate taste, like, you can never make the same aloo gosht like my mother. But that's not really true, because taste really is divided scientifically into 5 different sensations. There's bitter, sour, salty, and umami. So when we can learn to rely on taste and flavor instead of generational recipes. We can easily swap out ingredients like pomegranate molasses, like I earlier spoke about, for local alternatives, which means making enjoying in the flavors that we are used to, embedded in memory, both economically and environmentally sustainable. And this is really the key to how we are going to save the planet. By allowing our tongues to navigate and lead us to the taste that we know, by allowing the new to feel like the familiar, and by trusting that our sense of taste will not betray memory. The project also serves as a reminder to everybody, to the participants and to the city of Umeå, how cross-border movement has made it possible for them to have their favorite delicacies like the baklava in Sweden, with wheat from Asia, sugar that only made its way to Sweden 150 years ago, and pistachios from Iran. But most importantly, and really this is what the presentation has been about, but most importantly, with the knowledge of an immigrant who has carried the recipe and the flavors and aromas across the seas. With the conversations in the world going on about migrants and borders and legal and illegal, the food memories and the knowledge of the immigrant becomes the inconspicuous contraband, quietly transgressing borders and transforming cities. And I'm going to end this presentation with a little advertisement that the Scandinavian Airlines released literally only 2 weeks ago, which I think sums up what I've been talking about really wonderfully.
It's truly Scandinavian.
Grattis!
Absolutely nothing.
Nada.
Niente.
There is no such thing.
Everything is copied. Our
Vi
democracy,
människor som tillsammans formar framtiden.
credit goes to Greece. Parental leave,
Thank you, Switzerland.
the iconic Scandinavian windmills were actually invented in Persia. And we made the German bicycle a staple of our cities. It's Turkish,
Smörpål?
Dutch,
What about licorice?
it's Chinese, and
Midsommarstången?
German.
And it gets worse.
rumor has it the oh-so-Swedish meatballs might not be as Swedish as you think, but Turkish.
Even the Danish isn't Danish.
It's Austrian. And the pride of Norway, the paperclip, was actually invented by an American.
And while we're at it,
America, thank you for taking the first steps
in empowering the women's rights movement.
We're no better.
Than our Viking ancestors.
We take everything we like on our trips abroad, adjust it a little bit, and
Voila!
it's a unique Scandinavian thing. Going out into the world inspires us to think big, even though we're quite small. Because every time we go beyond our borders, we add colors, innovation,
Progress.
adding the best of everywhere to here. In a way, Scandinavia was brought here. Piece by piece. By everyday people who found the best of our home away from home. So, we can't wait to see what wonderful things you'll bring home next.
Thank you, Architect Leena Naqvi, for the wonderful presentation.